Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second webinar in STARS project. My name is Marko Horvat, and for the next hour and a half, I will be your moderator. I'm connecting with you from ICLE European Secretariat Office in Freiburg, Germany. We're very pleased that you all have joined us today. We have 16 attendees, out of which we have 5 uptake cities that will introduce themselves in a moment. Cluj-Napoca, Oradea from Romania, Varna, Sofia from Bulgaria, Warsaw, Budapest, and Bratislava. Also special thanks to all the colleagues from sister projects, High Reach, Motive, and Inclusion that joined us today. We hope that you will enjoy our second webinar and that you will learn something new about car sharing, and that this webinar will inspire you to look more closely into car sharing as a way to improve mobility in your cities. Moreover, today is the fifth day of European Mobility Week, and it's very appropriate that we organize it also this week. Before we get started, I would like to go over some technical aspects of this webinar. You can connect using your computer, as I'm sure most of you already did. But there's also a possibility to dial in using your phone. If you'd like to dial in, please select the dial in option in the audio panel, and all the necessary instructions will be displayed, after which you will enter the PIN code. In order to have a smooth participation in this event, all attendees are muted upon connecting into the webinar to reduce the background noise. You can only be unmuted by us. By raising your hand, you will let us know if you have a question or a comment, and we will reply either by unmuting you or through a written comment using the chat dialog. You can also use the chat dialog to ask questions regarding the technical issues or during the presentation directly to presenters, but I will come to this issue in a bit. Now, just to do a quick check to understand if everybody can see me and hear me well, please raise your hand if you can hear me. I'll give you a couple of minutes. You'll find the raise hand bar as shown on the screen. Okay, some of you raised their hands, some of you didn't, which means that at least someone can hear me and see me, 5 people. If someone has a problem, can you please type it in questions or comments section, and then we will see what we can do about it. Otherwise, I will assume that everybody can hear me. Okay. On the general note, this webinar will be recorded, and all registered participants will receive the recording once the webinar has ended directly in their email. Could be today in 2 hours, but could be tomorrow or on Monday. Our lineup for today is a variety of car sharing experts and partners in STARS projects from different parts of Europe. In order of presenting today, you will first meet Jeffrey Mathies. He is director at Autodelen.net from Ghent, Belgium, who will try to answer the question how to make car sharing mainstream by integrating car sharing policy at European, national, and local level. Then you will meet Gunnar Nerke, who is managing director of the German Car Association, BCS, Car Sharing Association, BCS, who will tell us about the impact of different car sharing variants on urban mobility. Then you will meet Michael Glotz-Richter, who is a senior project manager for sustainable mobility for the city of Bremen, and who will share STARS research results and practical implementation of car sharing policies on municipal level. After the presentation, Marco Diana, associated professor at transport engineering and planning at Politecnico di Torino, Italy, and STARS project coordinator, will share with us a couple of final words. Quickly about the agenda today. Our agenda is split in 5 parts. After my brief introduction, uptake cities, hopefully they manage to join in, will briefly introduce themselves and say a couple of words about mobility situation in their city. If you have attended or watched the recording of the first webinar, perhaps you already know them, but in any case, they will use this opportunity to present themselves again. In the next 3 slots, the structure will be 15 minutes presentation on a car sharing topic, followed right away by 5 minutes question slot. Therefore, during the presentation, if you have any questions, you're encouraged to type the questions in the chat box, and we will use 5 minutes question slot after the presentation to answer them immediately. Finally, in the last session, our project coordinator Marco Diana will say a couple of words. So now I'll say a few words about the STARS project itself. STARS stands for Shared Mobility Opportunities and Challenges for European Cities, and it is a project that is being funded under Horizon 2020 program. The project started in October 2017 and will finish in 2020, and it involves 9 partners with different backgrounds all across Europe. STARS project in its core aims to explore the diffusion of car sharing in Europe, its connections with technological and social innovations, as well as the impact on other transport modes and on the industry. We will hear more details from my colleagues, but now I would like to announce our 7 uptake cities, or those who managed to join us today. And I would like to ask them to give us a brief introduction of who they are and what is the mobility situation in their city, possibly with an outlook on shared mobility. Since I am not 100% sure who are the representatives from the uptake cities, and I know some. I see that there is Andras from BKK. So I would like to Andras, if it's possible, to say a couple of words. Andras, good morning.
Can you please repeat the question?
Are you the BKK, the Budapest representative today, who will say a couple of words on behalf of Budapest?
Yeah, but I don't know any information. Which word can I talk to you, say to you? I don't have any information about that.
Okay. Last time we had uptake cities who prepared a short presentation on their car sharing situation and mobility situation in their cities.
Okay, I can talk about that. We have 3 car sharing companies in Budapest. 2 of them are operating, I think, since 2016. One company is operating only with e-cars. They have, I guess, 400 e-cars in the city, mainly in the city center. And the other companies operating with 150 e-cars and 300 normal car, and they are one of the gas station companies company. So in Hungary there is a big gas station company, the MOL, and their company is this car sharing company. So they build a new platform for that. And in this year, I guess in April, there became a new car sharing company in Budapest, and this is the Drive now, which I guess in other cities as well. And they operating with e-cars and normal cars too, and they have premium cars, for example BMWs. And yeah, this is the car sharing situation in Budapest.
Okay, thank you very much, Andras. That was a perfect presentation. I would suggest that we now have one more uptake city presentation. If Gergana is here on behalf of Sofia. Let me see where to find her. Good morning, Gergana. Is it possible if you share a couple of words on Sofia? Hello? Hello? Okay. Hello? Can you hear us? For some reason, we have technical difficulties hearing Gergana. Okay, we can perhaps come to this later. We can try again. I see that she's trying to open. Hello?
Hello.
Hello. Hi. We can hear you now.
I'm trying to fix my... Do you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
I cannot hear you now.
If I can.
Do you hear me now?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, finally.
Okay, perfect.
I had to replace from
This happens
from
almost every
screen.
webinar.
I had to plug in the computer, not from the screen. Now everything is perfect. I'm Gergan Ogniskar from Sofia Mobility Center. This is the company dealing with the public transport in the city, and we are a municipal company fully controlled by the municipality. In Sofia, we deal with the operators in the public transport, and we also take part in organizing such issues and like the e-scooters and e-cars by collecting information from other cities. This is our participation. But now in Sofia, the situation is we have Spark car sharing, fully electric cars sharing service, which operates since 2016, 2017 mainly. Started the operation in Sofia, and so far they have about 300 cars in use in the city center, and charging points all around the country, about 200 charging points. The plan of the company, it is only one company so far for the sharing e-cars, and their plan is until 2024 to have 1,000 cars in Sofia, to increase the number of cars, and about 1,000 charging points in the country. The price is, I think it's as everywhere in Europe, 15 cents per minute or 30 euro per day, and the cars are parked for free in the blue and green zone in the city center, and they are charged for free using an application. About the company, it's a Bulgarian Lithuanian company, shared company, and the charging points are Bulgarian, maintained by a Bulgarian company. There are several, about 9 types of cars used for sharing, like BMW, Hyundai, Volkswagen, and some of them are smaller smart cars, some of them are for cargo and passenger, for more passengers also. And the network is supported by the Bulgarian company L-Drive. Another sharing service in Bulgaria, which in Sofia, which started soon, is the e-scooter sharing service. It started in August. By the first participants are Lime e-scooter. They started with, I think at the moment, 300 or 300 scooters for sharing. And since 1 week, we have Bram. And also from Monday, Bram is supported by Bert, another American company. which is popular. And from Monday, we'll start Bulgarian company. Its service will be as no analog in Europe, a local company to start the service. The scooters were initially, the municipality provided initially a defined network for parking in the blue and green zones, and about 150 parking places were dedicated for the shared scooters and for eventually bicycles, because we don't have the bike sharing system, but citizens can use the spots to park their bicycles also, or in future, if we have a bike sharing system, it could be also used, because there are locking bars for the for locking bikes. And these 150 places from the blue and green zone were formed by the following criteria for the positions: to be close to public buildings, to public transport stops, to the main trade centers, schools, universities, etc., in order to be convenient for the citizens. And these 150 locations form about 0.5% of the total number of parking places in the city. Users are recommended to use helmets, to ride on bike lanes or right side of the streets, but not to boulevards or sidewalks. And the statistics for 1 month are 30,000 rides of 10,000 users, with average of 11 minutes use, or 40,000 kilometers. It is to be further developed depending on the next statistics, but the situation so far is quite good. And yeah, this is from me, if you have questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much. It was very comprehensive, and it seems like there's a great amount of development happening in Sofia. Perhaps,
yes.
we also we had Razvan online, but now he disappeared. He's from Cluj-Napoca, and I wonder if Lucia could tell us some words on behalf of Varna. Lucia?
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly fine. Good morning.
Okay. So sorry for my late inclusion, but I had a phone call with Santa Monica from California from our NACTO conferences. We are writing now the report about this. So in Varna, we are advancing with our preliminary measures related to the urban SUMP, Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan. First of all, we successfully launched the Blue Zone in summertime. It was very much appreciated by our community, by population that first was not satisfied with this new organization, new zoning, but just after several weeks after the introduction in June, they wanted it to be enlarged. And actually we have 2,800 places, but new 5,700 places are prepared, are designed, and the Blue Zone will be enlarged next year 3 times more than the existing one now. We made a public procurement and purchased 18 e-cars for managing the Blue Zone, for putting lamps for the irregular parking and observing the functioning of the Blue Zone. We also are preparing for organizing a very huge event related to the European Mobility Week. On 22nd of September, we are organizing our car-free day, the same as in Sofia. The central part of Varna will be closed, and there will be a cycling parade, manifestation. The mayor will speak with the people about the new measure and the new plan that will be introduced. So it will be very big event, and for the first time we will show the new transport infrastructure, because we have restructured in Varna the central boulevards in order to implement the new transport scheme that will be part of our SAMP. For these purposes, we made a public procurement of new 60 e-buses with money from the European structural funds from the Ministry of Environment, the operational program of environment. And also we ordered 31 charging stations that will be placed mainly in the central part of the city, in the enlarged blue zone, and they will be public and free of charge. It will be a very big stimulus for introducing the e-mobility in Varna. And we are counting a lot on this initiative to make our cities more green, more with clean air, and to just to mitigate the climate changes. A new, up to now, partly partly organized and small initiative is the greening of the parking spaces. Already several new parking spaces outside of the blue zone are equipped with new trees, new greening we put there, and it's really already very attractive, very nice, very attractive. We don't want to strengthen the parking for the Varna citizens, but at least we want to make some greening belts surrounding the parking spaces in order to mitigate the pollution, the air pollution of our city. The pedestrian zone in Varna is already nearly ready. The plan was to enlarge it further during the next several years, but in the central part of Varna, we already have a very nice pedestrian zone. And finally, if I have some more minutes, I would like to announce that we have a very successful cooperation with Santa Monica, California. It's our paired city under the program International Urban Cooperation of the European Union. Last year we won a project for cooperation, mutual learning, and cooperation between Varna city and Santa Monica, and also with some other North American cities, is very useful and very it gives very good results. So it's developing now. Representatives of both cities will participate in the Civitas meeting in Graz next month. So I think that for Varna, the mobility measures are developing successfully till present.
Very good. Thank you very much for this holistic overview of Varna. Sounds very exciting. And even though we are a little bit behind with the uptake series, I think it's very important for us to hear from one more uptake city from Warsaw. If Tamas, if you could be so kind to share a couple of words. Can you hear us? Let's see. Tamas, can you hear us? No, nothing. Okay, maybe we can come back later to it. In this case, I would like to continue with our presentation, and I will hand over to my colleague Jeffrey, who will tell us more on how to make car sharing mainstream. After this presentation, as we said before, we will have 15 minutes presentation and then 5 minutes questions that you can type in as Jeffrey is presenting. Jeffrey, the floor is yours.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Just like this. Hello, everybody. My name is Jeffrey Matthijs from Autodelen.net, and I will present something about the ways you can make car sharing mainstream in your cities. So first of all, who are we? Well, we are a network of car sharing in Flanders, Belgium, and we like to excuse me, Marco.
Yes.
I think you are typing and it's a little bit disturbing. I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we are a network of car sharing, and we try to promote car sharing in every way. We try to do some innovations, and our main purpose is to share our experience in masterclasses. We support car sharing in every way. We promote car sharing. Also for non-traditional target groups, for instance, we try to share cars for people who are disabled and in a wheelchair. We're also the initiator of the Green Deal and the Mobi Hubs, which I will tell you more about in my presentation. So this presentation has been based on, first of all, a set of policy recommendations made by the STARS project. You can click on the link afterwards and then we will send you to the 10 recommendations. Also, it's about the Interreg North Sea region project Share North. Also, the website is included, and our own fieldwork and experience in Flanders. So, I will just give you some ideas of the way to make car sharing mainstream. And first of all, I think that's very important. You have to plan car sharing. You just can't do it. You need to have a vision. And car sharing, for instance, if we're talking about Europe, should be part as an obligate element in a sustainable urban mobility plan. So everybody has to think about sharing cars or shared mobility in general. Of course, we know that a sump is quite expensive and it's more for the big cities. So it should be also part of more regional mobility plans. And of course, I think the main character in this story is the local government. Local authorities are key players in order to get car sharing mainstream. So how can they do that? Well, or why are they a key player? Well, first of all, car sharing is a local story. People will use cars in the neighborhood, not from another city. Also, it's about the community. It's the community of car sharing people. And very important, car sharing has several links with other local policy issues. For instance, parking policy, for instance, welfare, and so on. So that's why local authorities are key players. And we also like to think that a local authority needs to plan his actions by setting up a car sharing action plan. That's like a midterm action plan from about 5 years. You start with today and then you set some ambitious goals, and every year you set up some concrete actions. Those actions are about creating a framework, for instance, or communication actions, setting up Mobi hubs, and so on and so on. But you have to plan your vision on car sharing in order to make it mainstream. A second one I would suggest is aim for a suitable mix of car sharing. As we all are aware, car sharing has different forms, and I can't stress it enough, but you have actually two kinds of car sharing. Car sharing organized by fleet-based providers and also the sharing of private cars. If we are talking about car sharing fleet-based, then you have two main objects, namely the round trip car sharing organizations, the one which you can pick up a car in a certain area or a certain parking spot and you return it to the same place. The other ones are so-called free floating, and that's where you pick up a car in a city and you can leave it everywhere in that city. So that's for the car sharing providers with their own fleet. You can also share private cars. You can do it on two ways. The most common and well-known is the peer-to-peer car sharing. It's just like Airbnb, but instead of a house or an apartment, you put online a car and people who register can ask to use your car. But you can also do it among neighbors in closed groups. And the big difference between the two systems is peer-to-peer. It's like the market who is taking care of the price. It's supply and demand. And the other one is just a cost-based system. When you do it in closed groups among neighbors, then you just pay the real cost price for 1 mile. Also, peer-to-peer, you also have to sign a contract with every transaction, with every ride. With the closed groups, you just do it once with the owner, and then you can use it like a car sharing fleet provider. So those are different types of car sharing. And why do you have to set in to a mix? Well, I just give you one example, also based on a study in the STARS project. But if you're looking at the different types of car sharing, you can definitely see a different pattern in rides. For instance, the free floating, most of the time, it's like 5 to 9 kilometers, the rides. Where you have with round trip, it's a more mix of things. And the peer-to-peer car sharing, the privately shared cars, are most of the time for more days and more mileages. So if you put on a campaign to promote every type of car sharing, you can have a solution for every car trip. And I think that's very important as a local government. Third thing, I would like to call invest in on and offline mobility as a service. And especially the offline mobility as a service is very important, because if you don't have an offer, you can't have an online mobility as a service system. And the offer, you can put it together on a Mobi hub. We call it in Flanders a Mobi punt, and it's just a place in the neighborhood where you have different mobility options. And that's very interesting. If you have several Mobi hubs in your neighborhood, in your city, you can connect them with each other, and people don't need an own car. And a Mobi hub can be used as a multimodal thing. Just for instance, I drive with my bike to the hub, then I use a shared car, and afterwards I use a shared bike, for instance. But it can also be a starting point. We call it unimodal, because for shopping, you need sometimes a car. Or if it's too late to use public transport, you need a car. Or I just have to be in a hurry, then you use a car. So a Mobi hub is actually a user-friendly alternative for the ownership of a car. It's a very important thing. And the online thing, we like to call it the bricks and the bytes alliance, because online you have the apps, the mobility as a service, which will connect several modes of transport, which also have a dynamic route planning. And then you need to have the offer, and you can bundle them in Mobi hubs. So also very interesting to put in something like that. Also, maybe I can say also that the Mobi hubs are conquering Europe, and we have Mobi hubs in Norway, in Germany, in the UK, in the Netherlands. So you will hear from that later on also. A very important thing to know, if you want to make car sharing mainstream, then you have to communicate. You have to communicate because people have to know car sharing exists and it's beneficial. But how do you do it? Well, first of all, I would say promote car sharing in general. Don't focus only on one mode of car sharing, but ask people, do you need an own car, or do you need a second own car? And then propose alternatives. And probably this is the most important suggestion to communicate about car sharing. Don't stop promoting. You need to do a promotion campaign on every level, and always. And on every level, I mean, you can use websites, you can use leaflets, but also aim, for instance, on different target groups. The one time you are aiming to the seniors, the other time to the younger people, then maybe in a specific region or the city, but always do the promotion. Because car sharing is a mental process. people don't start to share a car from today to tomorrow. They have to think about it. They have to think they have to think it's possible for me living without a car. So it's a mental process. And the more you hear about car sharing, the more you're going to think about it. And then don't always focus on the first car. Sometimes people will say, I definitely need a car. But then you can say, okay, but you have 2 cars. Do you need that second car? It's very costly because you don't use it very often, and so on and so on. So those are some suggestions about the communication part of car sharing. Then I think one of the most practical things a city can do in order to make car sharing mainstream is to have a policy about parking and car sharing. Because if you promote car sharing through your parking policy, then people will see car sharing very often in the street. And I would like to suggest that if you have a parking management about car sharing, then you should have different types of permits. For instance, station-based car sharing needs to have dedicated parking places. So that's only for that shared car. But if you're talking about free-floating car sharing or the sharing of private cars, they only need a free parking permit because they don't need the dedicated car sharing spaces. So you have to make a diversion in the types of car sharing and then do the parking management in order to reach some goals. Also, you can integrate car sharing in other policy areas, and I think new building projects and city developments are one of the most important things you can do as a local government. For instance, if you have like a parking standard with new buildings projects, often in Flanders, for instance, it's like for every place where people live, I can't come to the word, but for every house, I'm sorry, you need to have, for instance, 1 or 2 parking places. If you do the car sharing thing, you can lower that because people won't need an own car. And if you put it in some regulations for new building promoters, they think it's very beneficial because parking spaces are very expensive for project promoters. So if they can lower it by offering car sharing, they will have also a very beneficial win on the finances. This is what I like this picture because if we develop our house as a city, it would look like this. So this is how many space we are consuming by cars which are just standing still in the city and not being used. So we have to rethink our vision, the way we create our cities. And I really like this picture because the blue thing, that's the house, it's huis in Netherlands. But if you're thinking about the place of mobility when you walk from your house, then first you should meet the sustainable alternatives. First you can walk and drive with bike, then you can take public transport and so on and so on. And you can see at the left of this picture that the privately owned car is like 500 meters away from the house. So people will think about using their own car because the alternatives are more closer to the house. So that's very interesting to integrate in your car sharing policy and your new building policy. And then as a last thing, I would say practice what you preach as a local government, because if you are giving the good example, people will say, okay, if you are doing it, we are willing to take the glove and we are going to start also. And one of the easiest thing to do as a local government is share your own fleet, because most of the cities own an own fleet to do some things, but in the weekend and outside office hours, they are not being used, just standing still. And the weekend is just the moment when people, civilians, need to have a car to go shopping, to go to family and rural areas, and so on and so on. So it's a perfect match between the fleet of the local government and the needs of the civilians. So that's interesting to take care of. And another thing you can do as a city is stimulate innovation. If you don't have an own fleet, you can, for instance, do some partnerships with others. And this is an example I really like. It's you can see the dot on Google Maps. It's in the middle of nowhere, a small city, 1,000 inhabitants, and they don't have the money to own an own fleet or to start car sharing. So they took care or they looked for partners, and they found it in a care organization who owns 2 electrical cars, and not used, the cars are not used very often. So local government talks to us, autodelen.net, we talk with the care organization, and we brought them into connect, or we connected them with a car sharing operator who is building some technology in the cars from the care organization. And the beauty of it is that they have now 2 shared cars in that small city, and it's used very often by the citizens. And the most beauty of it is, of the most beautiful part of it is that it's not only about car sharing, people can also make a reservation with a driver. So it's also a solution for people without a driver's license, older people, people who are sick, and so on and so on. So it's really making a difference in that city. And also, very nice, once a week the cars are being used to go to the shop, and people can give a list of shoppings, and it's brought at home. So innovation is also very important if you are talking about making car sharing mainstream. And then I would say if there are participants from Europe, we have a wish list for Europe. First of all, we think it's important we have a framework for car sharing in Europe, more like guidelines for cities to decide which provider can be active in our city. So some main framework, and every city can adapt it, but then it's very clear for every European city which providers are allowed and which are not so allowed. Also, for the providers themselves, it's very interesting, because then they only have to have one time a recognition or a good framework, and then they can be active in different European cities. Another thing is the fiscal system. The first of all, I would say VAT. It's most of the time it's very it's the highest scale of VAT people have to pay. In Flanders, for instance, on a car sharing trip, you have to pay 21% VAT. We think it's important that we lower that, for instance, to 6%. Then it's the same as public transport or bike sharing. And it's, in our opinion, car sharing is also a service for the public. So lower that VAT and do something about company cars. We can't allow company cars in our cities for the future. Company cars are just a way to pay wage to people with a low tax system. We think you have to pay people in money and not in cars. And third, also, if we're talking about the mass mobility as a service, I think it's very important, and we need it fast, that there is a European data standard, so every shared mobility operator and car sharing operator can adapt his standards, and everything can be connected, and then we can start sharing all over Europe. And some of you might have seen my spam at the left upper corner, and maybe you wonder what's all about that thing, Shared Mobility Rocks. Well, Shared Mobility Rocks is a non-conventional event which will be taking place in Brussels at the 8th of October. You still can register, and it's a very fun event about shared mobility in general, with very interesting speakers from everywhere from Europe. And we also ask you, your favorite rock number, because we're making a playlist for the party afterwards. So I would say register now, and I see you on Shared Mobility Rocks. Thank you for you listening to me. So Marco, this was my presentation.
Thank you very much. It was very refreshing and I think very useful for our attendees. In the meantime, yes, I tried to figure out Thomas's microphone didn't work, but we will see in the end of the presentations if we still have time to include one or more uptake series to also share their situation. So Jeffrey, if you could stay a little bit online, I have a question for you from Mikhail Korloy, who asked, what about charging infrastructure for the shared cars? Should these be installed by the car sharing companies? If not, the local EV drivers will compete with car sharing initiatives.
Well, that's all. Anyway, it's a very important question and a very important thing to do in the near future. We need to have charging infrastructure because we, of course, want to be the shared cars also zero emission. I don't think car sharing operators should do it. But they need to work together with the CPOs, the providers of the charging infrastructure, and the CPOs need to make sure that it's interoperable. I mean that you can use different suppliers of electric charging infrastructure with one card. And I would think if we're talking about charging infrastructure, very important. It's not a question who will take care of the hardware, because it will come anyway. It has to come, and there are big companies who are doing that already. But I think it's important that we can dedicate some charging infrastructure for car sharing operators, so they always have a place to charge their vehicles. Is that okay?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jeffrey, for a lovely presentation. Thank you, Mikhail, for your question. I would now like to proceed and hand over the screen to Gunnar, who will present the impacts of different car sharing variants on urban mobility. Again, after presentation, I will read some of your questions. So please go ahead and type the questions in. I will make Gunnar presenter. Okay. Gunnar?
Yes, Marco. I hope you can see my screen. Can you?
Yes, we can see.
But somewhere in the middle of everything, not at the start. Okay, now it should be better. Now you should see the starting page. Is that right, Marco?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, then I'll start with the presentation. Okay, this is a bit more more about facts and numbers and figures. It's about a case study on the impact of different car sharing variants on urban mobility that we did last year and this year in the city of Frankfurt in Germany. I have some problems to make the slide turn. Sorry, I have some technical problems with getting to the next slide. I think I'll do it this way. Okay, now it's moving. Yeah, to understand my presentation, I wanted to talk about the different car sharing variants that we analyzed in the city of Frankfurt, which are the round trip, the free floating, and the so-called combined version. I'm doing this in a very short way because Jeffrey already talked to you about that. basically the round trip version is that version of car sharing where you pick up the car in a defined parking or at a defined parking space, if it's optimally planned near the car sharing customer's home, and the car has to return to that parking space. That's why it's called round trip. In free-floating concepts, there is an operational areas, and cars are anywhere in this area and are spotted by a smartphone app. And then they can be parked anywhere in the operational area after usage. That's why it's called free-floating. In Germany, we also have systems we call combined systems, which means that round-trip and free-floating cars, not free-floating cars. It's just one free-floating, where round-trip and free-floating cars are offered in one car-sharing offer by the same operator and with an integrated tariff. And this is a kind of offer that's especially interesting to us as the car-sharing association, because in some aspects it seems to be that the best of both worlds combine in these offers. You will see that quite later in my presentation. Some facts about the case study we did in Frankfurt. The overall aim of it was to show the impact of car sharing from a user perspective, meaning that most analysis of car sharing impacts today are done from the operator perspective. What does this operator add to urban mobility? Which is not really useful to cities, because nowadays very many households in European cities have more than one car sharing membership, and it's the way the memberships interact with the households that really gives you an overview about is there an impact of car sharing on urban mobility. So that's what we wanted to show in our study. We did that in 2 waves. The first wave was May 2018, where we defined inner city residential areas with best in town conditions for adopting car sharing. And we did this. We didn't look at the whole city in this first wave, because we wanted that the framing conditions for car sharing adoption were exactly the same and comparable for every service in the city of Frankfurt, and that's why we defined an area. In April and May 2019, this year, we looked again at Frankfurt and then looked at the whole city. And in the following presentations, you will see both numbers of both ways. Some facts about the city of Frankfurt itself. It has 750,000 inhabitants. There are 900 car-sharing cars right now in the city, 459 round-trip cars, 440 free-floating cars. We focused on the city of Frankfurt because the range of providers in the city is quite large, meaning there are 2 round-trip services in the city of Frankfurt. There's one standalone free-floating car-sharing service, Share Now, which is the joint venture of Car2Go and Drive Now here in Germany. And there's one combined service which offers round-trip and free-floating cars in the same service, called Book and Drive. Actually, in the city of Frankfurt, the Book and Drive service is the largest service in the whole city. Some facts about the user groups we identified. There are several user groups. These are the user groups we focus on because they are most relevant, and most of people, for the people we interviewed, fall in one of these groups. So there are households that only own a round-trip membership. In our survey in the whole city, we identified 405 people. This is not the number of customers of the services, but the number of participants in our survey. And in our inner city area, it was 125 households that participated in our survey. And you can see the figures for all the other services. You see that the free-floating figures for Frankfurt are a bit low. We didn't manage to identify as many customers as we wanted to. Part of the problem here was that the car sharing service, meaning Shared Now, did not take part in the whole survey, so it was a bit hard to identify more customers. In my presentation, I will sometimes come back to other parts of the survey because we did the same thing in other cities as well, and you will see other figures. I will give you a hint when I show them. Interesting is the free-floating plus section, meaning these are households that own a free-floating membership, but have additional memberships with round-trip and or combined car sharing services. And it's quite interesting how these households behaved. We also asked non-users. You can see the figures for the non-users we could identify in our surveys as well. Okay, now I get to the results. The most interesting part you can see here. This is the number of cars in these households per 1,000 persons in the households. So we calculated the number of cars per 1,000 persons because in Germany, most other figures you could compare this with are calculated the same way. In dark blue, you can see the figures for the whole city of Frankfurt, in light blue for the inner city area we identified. As you can see, the round trip and combined services have very low number of cars per 1,000 persons in the households. On the opposite, the households that only owned a standalone free-floating membership just have a very high number of cars. And if you look right to the right of this screen, you can see that they have as many cars in that household as the non-users. Very interesting for us. The free-floating plus users, the two columns right near the non-users, who have a free-floating and a round-trip or combined membership, they also have quite good numbers if it comes to the number of cars per household, meaning low numbers. And this is quite interesting, meaning that parallel membership really impacts the way households structure their mobility. One additional point here, the German office, the Federal Office for the Environment suggests that a city where you practically do not see any cars and where practically there's no congestion on the road, this federal office suggests that the number of cars per households where this happens in cities would be 150, meaning round-trip households, combined households who use the combined system, and free-floating plus users are already near or below the figure that is suggested for a sustainable city transport when it comes to car traffic. Okay, this is the development of the car stock in the households separated by three user groups: round-trip, combined, and free-floating users, only users. You can see that we asked for the number of cars in the household at 3 times, 12 months before the registration to the car sharing service, the first car sharing service, at the time of registration and today. And as you can see, the number of cars falls significantly if you compare 12 months before registration to at the time of registration, meaning most cars are abandoned when people consider to use the service and are already no longer there when they enter the service. As you can see here, in the free-floating section, in the whole city as well as in the inner city, the reduction of cars is not very good. It's a bit better in the inner city areas, and this is something we found in all cities we looked at. This is not only a Frankfurt phenomenon. Now, if we ask why this is the case, why the development of the car stock is so different in the households, this might be part of the answer. We asked people, we asked people, is car sharing a full replacement for an own car? And as you can see, these are the results for the city of Frankfurt. Round-trip and combined users and free-floating plus users are really, a majority is of the opinion that yes, car sharing is a full replacement of a private car, while people who only use the free-floating service are really of a different opinion, and a majority disagrees. I show you the same results for the cities of Frankfurt and Cologne and Stuttgart for the inner city areas we defined in all these cities. And if you look at the third column, the free-floating column, you can see that on average, the reaction to is car sharing a full replacement for a private and owned car is a bit better than in the figures we just had in the city of Frankfurt. But you can see the same phenomenon. It's the people who only use the free-floating service who strongly disagree with the suggestion that car sharing might be a full replacement of a private car, while other services seem to be able to trigger another reaction, which is especially interesting with the combined and the round-trip and free-floating services, meaning that the round-trip system seems, which is in the round-trip households present, in the combined and in the round-trip plus free-floating households, the round-trip system seems to be somehow the backbone or the basis for saying that yes, car sharing can replace my private car. I show you here the number of car-free households in the city of Frankfurt, in the whole city. As you can see, these numbers are quite high. 80% or more of people don't own a car anymore, which is a great figure. Of course, we very much like this figure. If you look at the right column, these are the free-floating users which have a round-trip or combined membership as well. They are more with the other households that have other memberships and not with the standalone free-floating user households. Although, that's why I show this here, in all inner city areas we looked at, the number of car-free households in free-floating households is 30%, which is quite more than just the Frankfurt figure, which is at 7%. And another thing that is very encouraging is this. In all groups, people reacted very strongly. A strong majority says, no, I will not. I would not like to buy a car, but postpone the purchase to later. Meaning that a strong majority in all these households say, I don't use car sharing as a bridge product until I can afford a private car. But you can see this as well in the non-user group, meaning that all the non-users, and they all have cars, have the cars they wanted to have. So for the car sharing system, we can conclude that being car-free and only using the car-sharing system is really part of the lifestyle and not only a phase that people are in. Just to round this up, we also asked people how many cars would you own if there was no car sharing service you could use. And as you can see with all the red columns, that in all groups the number of cars would be much higher than it is today, which is shown in the blue columns. Even in the free-floating group, the number of cars would be a bit higher than 12 months before people registered to a car-sharing service. Okay, this is most of the things I wanted to say about the impact of car sharing on car ownership and a car-free living. And if I sum this up, I can say we can see from this figures, which are also in line with other German studies, we can really conclude that a station-based system is the basis or the backbone of the impact of car sharing on car ownership, and free-floating car sharing may be and can be an additional tool to attract more customers more quickly, which the combined system in Frankfurt, which has the absolute biggest customer base, already achieved. I will show just a few slides about other mobility behaviors, just to give you an impression. As you can see here, the use frequency of car sharing in all groups is very low, which is encouraging. This is what things should be like. People should use other modes, and they do. We can see in other figures that they use public transport very often, that they use the bike very often, and that they use, as you can see here, the car sharing service 1 to 3 days a month or less, a big majority of people. And this is exactly what we want. If you look deeper into the details, you find out that the round-trip combined and free-floating plus users use public transport a lot, use the bike a lot, which is what is wanted from a city perspective. In the free-floating user group, this is a bit different. The free-floating service is often used as a taxi replacement parallel to the private car, and this is what triggers the short distances you could see in my colleague Jeffrey's presentation before, meaning people travel only 8 to 10 kilometers within half an hour in inner city areas with free-floating cars, because very often they replace taxi trips, because free-floating is in German towns usually cheaper than taxi rides would be. Okay, some impacts on public transport you can see here. This is the amount of non-users in all groups shown in red, and the number of non-users shown in yellow today, meaning red before registration to car sharing, yellow today. As you can see in all user groups, the non-use of public transport decreased, which is good, which is encouraging. If you look in parallel at ownership of public transport season tickets, you find out that the ownership rate in round-trip and combined households rises. If you look at what people did before joining the service and today, in the free-floating user group, the PT season ticket ownership decreases a bit, meaning in this group more non-users and more people who before that owned public transport season tickets went into the I just buy trip tickets for public transport section, which is not exactly what is wanted, but this is what happens in this group. Okay, this is my presentation. Lots of figures, lots of numbers. I don't hope you can were able to follow everything I did. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gunnar, very much. I think it was very eye-opening as well, especially with the free-floating information that just increases the overall traffic and problems in the city instead of helping. On the other side, it's a good user base. It's a good for getting customers on.
Yeah, perhaps Marco, I can add one thing. These are figures for Frankfurt. There were some figures in for Stuttgart and Cologne as well. But I have to stress here that this phenomenon is in part city-specific. So I would advise every city to look at this phenomenon in their city to find out if this tendency that we found can also be found in their city.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And we have 15 minutes left. Michael is the last presenter today. So there was no questions asked immediately. So I will directly give the floor to Michael. And yes, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, if you could change the screen to me.
Yes, there you go.
Okay.
Does it work?
Do you see something?
Yes, yes, we see the square.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Wonderful. So welcome from my side as well. What you see here is the, oops, now I have to close this. What you see is the main square of Bremen. Bremen is a city with 570,000 inhabitants. So little big city, we can call it. It's a harbor city. And this is our historic city hall and the St. Peter's Cathedral. What you see here is a lot of people enjoying that space. You see some few cyclists, you see a tram, public transport, you see pedestrians. But maybe you may miss one thing, that's cars. And here you see already it's pedestrianized. So if we want to achieve a certain atmosphere in the city, we have to deal with a car and get the car also out of the street space. This was in the 50s and 60s, by the way, a big parking lot. Yeah, this square was used completely unimaginable today to turn this back to a parking lot. So, and why only in city centers? Why not similar strategies in our neighborhoods? Now I have to, I don't know why. Okay. Here you see the modal split of Bremen. You can see that almost half of all trips are done by walking and cycling. So active modes play quite important role. Almost every fourth trip is a cycle trip. And 36% of all trips are done by car. The motorcycle doesn't play a big role. So this is pretty good, but still we have a lot of problems. And okay, this is, for instance, one of our neighborhood streets, and you see it's completely dominated by parked cars. And you see also that a change to electric cars will not help whatsoever to change here this perception of the street space. So if you want to make this a nicer space, green it, have more space for bicycles, you see all the bicycles that are leaning against the walls. This is not safe bicycle parking, so this is something we have to work on, and the only thing you can do is by getting out cars. This is also a big problem. You see here someone with a pram is meeting someone with a shopping bag, and it's simply too narrow, and the cars there are mainly parked illegally, and that's a German disease. that the fines for parking are extremely low with 15 euros. People take that into account. What's more serious is that firefighters or waste collectors have problems sometimes to get through, and this is completely unacceptable. Problem is that car ownership and parking is extremely emotional. So all political debates are always very emotional. And now it comes to car sharing, because this is part of our main strategy when we say, okay, we are reorganizing the street space and taking out parking. In a European project called Sunrise, we have a neighborhood approach of co-creation and discussed all these things with the residents. And I will show you a word cloud, what they said, what the main problems are. Here you can see illegal parking and parking pressure and traffic behavior are main issues, and also the requirements for cycle infrastructure, which means both cycle parking as well as infrastructure for cycling. So you see that this is really the big issue in our neighborhoods. Car sharing in Bremen is station-based. We have no free-floating car sharing so far. The big players like Drive Now, Car2Go or Share Now, for them Bremen is too small. That's something, it's a question whether we miss it or not. We have 3 operators. The big one is Cambio, and you can do the usual things, so booking the car by either internet, smartphone or telephone, go to the station, have access, and use and return the car to the same station. So that's how it works here. And we have a real good distribution of car sharing stations. There are more than 100 stations in a city like Bremen, just recall, 500,000 inhabitants. So this works pretty well. We have already since 1998, so more than 20 years, this combination and promotion together with public transport, and as well with taxi, by the way. And here you see there is a steady growth. It started in 1990 with 28 people, and we want to achieve next year to have at least 20,000 users. The number of users is quite interesting, but what's more important to us is what are the impacts? What is the impact on car ownership? Here you see again the numbers, more than 100 stations and more than 350 car sharing cars. So this is what we do as a city. There are also car sharing stations on private ground, but about 1/3 of all car sharing stations, especially in inner city areas, are on public street space. And here you see the combination. You see the big pillar, so it's very visible, which is important. It's really a symbol that we stand for something. You see bicycle parking, and then you see 5 car sharing cars, and there's 1 electric car to answer that question as well, and a recharging point that's also available for every other electric car. So that's what we combine. Here you see in narrow neighborhoods, we always do these extended curbs so that space is cleared for the big vehicles to get around, like the firefighters or waste collectors. So here you see a station where the 2 cars are just away. We need this removable bollards there. That's, as I said, a German disease. Everyone who thinks that Germans are always keeping the rules is definitely wrong when it comes to parking and to speeding. I may say that as a German. So here you see how narrow our streets are in the neighborhoods. And the picture to the right, the top picture, shows this blue car, which is an absolute obstacle for firefighters and waste collectors. That's the situation before. Below you see the situation after. You may recognize that we widened the street here, the sidewalk, so there's more space for pedestrians. We took away what was there as parking and said, okay, that's now what we can do, because we know that car sharing is reducing car ownership. And we need to keep it clear. So this is a little bit part of a political deal, what you see here. So again, the situation before, you see how narrow it is with all the illegally parked cars, and the situation afterwards. Even the lady with the bicycle here before obviously got herself a new bicycle. Yeah, and here you see the shot from the other side. The car sharing station here is at the corner to the right. And so we took out all this illegal parking, had to put in bollards. There are a lot of pubs nearby. So this is a problem, especially at night with visitors from the region. Here you see the integration of electric cars. To make it clear, we don't see the necessity to have a pure electric fleet. We would see it even as an obstacle, because it creates some barriers for new customers where we want to say, okay, get away from your own car and try out car sharing. And when you say, okay, and then you try out also electric cars, and people are afraid that the range is not sufficient. So here people have the choice. Say, I can take an electric car, but I can also take a conventionally fueled car. I can take a minibus. I can take a van. So this is all available. And here you see we integrated also in new developments. So we can reduce parking there, which is in urban developments a question of construction costs. It's, I would say, insane that such constructions would spend 10 to 15% of the cost just for underground parking. We have to be aware that's the relation. And so when we talk about affordable housing, we have to talk also about how we can change mobility and reduce the number of car parking that's required. So this is also part of our strategy. Say, for the future, we don't need these many cars. We have availability of cars, and we have very good cycle infrastructure. You see here also the bicycle parking. So car sharing integrated in new housing, very important in urban areas. You can really create also new behavior with that. There's a service about the impacts that was carried out in 2007 by a company called Team Red. They have done it in other German cities with the same profile before. And you see what it means, and that's quite important and adds into what Gunnar said before. Car sharing here is really replacing the private car. You see the red bars are the car sharing users. So whereas in the reference group, about 80% have access to a car in the household, in the car sharing households, it's only 20% that have access at all times. And so it's really replacing the first car. That's the conclusion that you can draw here. So 80% of the car sharing users have no own car. What's quite important to us from the viewpoint of urban development is what are changes in behavior. And one point is that car sharing users do more of their grocery shopping in their neighborhood. It's pretty logic. When you have no car, you're not so interested in going to the shopping malls that you can access only by car. So we do something good also to the local economy in the neighborhoods. Yeah, and if you see that the reference group, that means the average in Bremen, goes 4 times as frequent to these big shopping centers as the car sharing users. That very impressively shows what, let's say, side impacts you can create when you change mobility behavior. And that's what we do in Bremen and try in Bremen now for quite a while. The question is, did people replace private cars? And they said 31% said yes, and 41% said we did not purchase a car. There are certain overlaps, and you see also how important was the provision of car sharing for the decision of not owning a car on the longer view, and you see it's very high or high 68 or 71%. So it has really an impact, the quality and reliability of station-based car sharing. So every car sharing car in Bremen, that's the result of the study, takes 16 cars off the road. That's the average over the entire city. Some neighborhoods are higher with about 20, some others are lower. So we're sharing cars, we're sharing space. So 5,500 cars are taken off the road. If we want to do the same impact by providing parking infrastructure, that would have cost us more than 100 million euros. And there you can see how much car sharing is related to urban development and to really mobility patterns in the neighborhoods. So what's important for the users? You see the top 3 things that the users say are important. First of all is the easy reservation and process. Then, and that's quite important when you also look at the things that Gunnar said about free-floating car sharing, that you know that a car is there, the reliability, that's number 2. That you know when you have tomorrow an important meeting, you can book a car. This is really important for users. And this third thing, proximity of the station, that's where we as a city come into. The first 2 points are with the operators, but the third point, proximity of the station, is definitely something where we as a city have a major role. And now we see what here this intermodal station with public transport is not so important. People want to have the cars in their neighborhoods. They want to have, or where they work. That's pretty clear. And trendy, sporty vehicles are not so important for the group of existing users. So these are the 3 top things that are important for users, so very practical aspects. And now we see the satisfaction level. And this is something where probably almost every company in the business sector would be glad to have satisfaction levels that are clearly around 80 and above 80%. So this shows that people are really very satisfied with the level of service and also with the proximity of stations. And that's what we also try to improve, more stations, going into new neighborhoods, combining it with all the new developments. So car sharing is really part of our, let's call it, urban development DNA. It became part of that within the last 10 years. Yeah, and here are the famous Bremen Mobilpunkt stations, mobility points, always with these pillars, not always with blue sky, to be honest. And this, when you compare, this is Bremen, and this is the Norwegian city of Bergen. Within a European project, they got the license and the design for these stations using the same design. I think this is pretty smart and works very well and pleases us, of course, as well. Here was the inauguration last year, so we were there, and this is really, for us, part of European cooperation and projects. So this was the presentation, and if there are any questions, yeah, Beate and I would be happy to answer that. And of course, you're always welcome if you want to visit Bremen. Thank you for your attention.
Very good. Thank you, Michael, for your lovely presentation. During the presentation, there was no questions made, so we'll see if maybe they still come. Since we started 5 minutes after 11, we still have 1 more minute, and I would like to ask Marco Diana to say a couple of final words, and then we can bring the webinar to the end.
Yes, hello. Thank you for those presentations. I will really won't take more than 1 minute because I think we already have quite a lot of information on several different points, and I really think that the most important takeaway is to understand that car sharing is not just a unique concept, a unique word, is a tool that can be used to cities, but you need to know that there are several different ways in which you can work and implement car sharing according also to the different policies, because different cities have different policies. And the final step of this project that will run until next March is exactly trying to match the different kinds of car sharing and the strategies of implementation of car sharing to the different policies in different cities, in order to come up with something that can be really useful for different European cities, because we all know that in different countries the situations are quite different. And my last final remark is an invitation, and just I would like to inform you about the next events that are organized by this project. We have already heard about the Shared Mobility Rocks event. This is not a STARS event, but it's clearly supported also from this project. It will be in Brussels. And maybe some of you is going to the Civitas Forum in Graz at the beginning of October. I think it's between 2 and 4 October. In that case, please be aware that the STAR project will be present in a book. So if you go in the exhibition area, please have a look at our stand. You will find there information materials and also people from our project in case you want to better discuss about that. And last but not least, we will have a big event in Paris on October 14th to 15th. This is a car sharing camp out, it has been named. There will be a lot of people that are going to speak about that. We will have the deputy major for transport of the city of Paris that will open this workshop. And I think it will be really a good occasion to try to have some interaction also, not only through the phone, which is always something which is perhaps not ideal. So I hope that we will meet in some of those events. And having said that, I also thank you all for your attention, and I leave the mic back to Marco if you want to add something.
Yes, no, just briefly, thank you very much to all of you who participated today. A big thank you to Uptake Cities, who are very active in our STARS project and also other mobility projects. So thank you very much. And thanks to my colleagues who presented, colleagues from sister projects, and all of those who participated today. As I said before, this is being recorded and you will get the link to the video. This is it. Thank you very much, and have a nice day and have a nice weekend.